for coming tonight. It's a very special evening, and I think we're going to in for a real special treat with Calvin Hennig tonight. But first, I want to say a quick thank you to Lori Day and the rest of the church committee to allow us to be here tonight. This is a wonderful venue, so thank you, Lori, for getting us in here. We really appreciate it. So we're going to listen to Calvin Hennig tonight talk about his encountering of James Fitzgerald, starting at the time when he worked with the Huberts back in the early 80s to do the first biography. But there's a lot more to it than that. Calvin's always had a lot of insight. I want to talk a little bit about his professional choices and positions, and also his educational choices, because sometimes you look at someone who has a particular perspective, and it's interesting to look back and see how did they get there, what was their path. As well, this talk tonight is very special for two reasons. First of all, it's the first lecture in the new established Edward L. Deasy Endowed Lecture Series that we started last year in commemoration for Ed to honor his commitment and dedication to the museum. So we want to say thank you, Ed, for all that you've done, and we look forward to many lectures every summer from here on. So thank you very much. I think it's really appropriate that we have a Fitzgerald-related lecture to start this series, because Ed was so involved with the Huberts over the years and was very involved with Anne when she decided to give the gift to the museum. So it's all very connected. And the other reason it's really special this year is we have the exhibition at the museum, and it's James Fitzgerald, of course. And hopefully you've had a chance to get up there. If not, you will. And I want to give a special shout out to Emily Gray here for being the primary curator and doing an amazing job. It's beautiful. So thank you. So on to Calvin. So Calvin comes with a very unique and interesting perspective, and I'll just kind of, I can read a resume, but so what? But when I do read your resume and when we chat, it's interesting to see. So Calvin got his bachelor's in philosophy, and considered it going on and getting his master's in philosophy, but felt that might not be fully all of his interest. So he goes to Europe and rides a motorcycle around Europe for a summer with a friend of his, just to look at art, sleeping in the fields and just camping it out, but really getting into art and history and architecture, and decides that that's his path. And he then gets his master's through Syracuse University and has a fellowship at the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and also does his master's thesis in that area. So goes on to be a popular professor in various places, I hope. I'm sure that's true. And then is a curator at the Jocelyn in Omaha, Nebraska, which was your hometown, I believe, and was a very important museum as a young person growing up, so that's a nice connection. And then was the curator at the Portland Museum of Art in Maine. And I think that's about the time that the Huberts and you connected, I believe. And that was right about the time that you had gone back for your PhD in humanities and art history. So, on paper it's one thing, but really I think that speaks to such a unique and interesting choice, and the way that you've chosen to proceed with your life. And I think when I first met Calvin really was through the first documentary. I read the book when you wrote it in the mid-'80s when it first came out, but it was the documentary that I saw this person who was part of the documentary with the Huberts as well, of course, but the way Calvin spoke about the artwork and the man, I thought, here's somebody who's very intelligent, but very sensitive, very open to what is happening, what is Fitzgerald offering, and I've come to feel that there is something special, that there is a special choice or process and offering that the artist is making, and I think more than many artists, because he was so committed to his work, and that's what we're exploring at the Odyssey of James Fitzgerald exhibition this year. So I was really thrilled when I asked Calvin if he'd be willing to talk about these issues, and because it's what he was doing before, and he's always had a wonderful sense of who this person is and giving a lot of great insight. So I was thrilled when he agreed to do that. And so I think we're in for a real treat tonight. I won't say any more, but I'd just like to welcome Calvin and say thank you very much, and I think we're in for a real treat. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation from the Fitzgerald legacy, and also with us, with special regards to Ed DC, special honor to him. He was here right from the very beginning for me, so what you hear here involves him kind of embroidered all the way through, actually, so it seems very fitting. A word about the works of art here. I had not framed this talk around images, visual images, nor these particular works. But we thought that it was a little silly to be talking about art without something up. So we put these up, and so a few of them I'll refer to as we go along. And just for your delectation, they're a wonderful broad selection, which is very much in keeping with Fitzgerald's movement, which was broad indeed. Certainly we can do some answering questions after this is over, but also it might be fun just to, after it's over, come up and chat and look at these things and have discussion about them together. It's a nice way to learn, and it's also, I always like that because I know what I feel about works, and I'm more interested in what somebody else feels about them. So in any event, I hope that's enjoyable to you, and we'll start from there. In speaking with Dan some weeks ago, we hit on the theme for this talk, which is encountering James Fitzgerald, which is how I became involved with Jim in the first place, and how it led to producing the first published biography. I like the idea of that for the reason that I taught art history for a good many years, and I didn't want to do that format again. So often it's image after image after image, and I've grown tired of it, actually. It's really true that the book was a symbol of importance of launching pad that helps us to get here today in talking about Fitzgerald. But the truth of it is, honestly, I stand between two mountains. One of them, on one side, are the Huberts, who with the enormity of work that Ed and Anne put into this from scratch, organizing and promoting Fitzgerald for the entire latter part of their lives. That is one thing that obviously they were before me, and their credit stands for, certainly for everything that I did. And then the second, actually, is the work of the Fitzgerald legacy, and especially Bob Stahl, who, as you know, has produced an incredible catalog raisonné. The second volume is due out very soon, we keep saying. That, of course, furthers this. So I'm standing, I think, very much between the two of these. And if you've not seen it, I'd like to recommend something to you, which is a video you may find online of a lecture that Robert gave to the Mayer Museum of Randolph College in May of this year. It is absolutely excellent. I certainly recommend it. Randolph College. My knowledge does not approach Bob Stahl's, nor probably never did, actually. Since he's going to be speaking a few days from now, it seemed a little silly for me to give an art history lecture on Jim Fitzgerald. Since you're going to hear this again, I have a feeling. So the truth of it is that my talk tonight is really a story. It's a story, among others, that has led us to the recognition of Jim Fitzgerald's well-deserved importance in the art of this island and in California and beyond, actually. And it wouldn't make very much sense to give this kind of casual talk anywhere else, because Fitzgerald's his life was so embroidered with the life of this island. So it could be considered simply as a bit of added history, and that helps give color to Fitzgerald's legacy, and so we began. Still shy of a PhD, I came to Portland in 1979 as a curator of collections at the Portland Museum of Art, of course, and had museum experience before coming, and also some years in teaching, college teaching, naturally, and although my specialty, as Dan has revealed, is not necessarily a specialty in American art. It's quite broad. After a period of adjustment, probably about a year or so, I was called into the office of the director who told me he'd been approached by a couple who lived in Dover, Massachusetts, and they wanted to give some paintings to the museum that were done by a friend of theirs on Monhegan Island. Now, and this particular artist is now deceased. So, the Huberts, by the way, also had a house on the island. Would I contact them? Would I set up a meeting? And I was very eager to do so. But if one works for a pretty prestigious museum, if you're a curator at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, likely at this kind of meeting, at the end of it, you're going to see a treasure coming at you. But the smaller museums, that's not always the case. And I have done that before, and I've done it before this offer from the director. Usually you find good works, but oftentimes lesser quality. And of course, that's a little difficult because people are obviously proud of the works they have. So I wasn't sure what I was getting into naturally. The Huberts were not known to the staff, and nor was Fitzgerald's work to any great extent, and so this was something of an exploration. So it was I remember it was on a fair weather day, probably in late spring. I drove to Dover and was treated to a lunch and very warm welcome by the Huberts. And parenthetically, the backyard fronted a very generous pond. Anne had told me that they never wanted to live anywhere that was not away from water. So, and getting through the back door, you went through a flower garden on either side, a raised flower garden that Anne tended very carefully, and it was quite beautiful, actually. So, in any event, there was a decorative easel that was at the end of the living room. I have to ask the people here to know, but I think it belonged to J. Conway. I'm not sure, but it was a beautiful easel, and who actually in his years in Monhegan had exhibited at the Bose Gallery, as did Jim Fitzgerald. Wonderful natural light, I remember that, coming in through the curtains on the deck off in the backyard. Ed would do what some of you know here very silently. There's a painting stack, of course, very silently, put a picture on the painting on the easel and then leave it there for a considerable amount of time. This occurred over and over again with a good deal of silence, except for some narrative comments by Anne. And she would talk about Jim, talk about his philosophy of art, talk about maybe some specific content in the work itself. And so what was on display? All right, so this is the richest of the riches that I ran into when I was there. Monhegan in winter. Well, that right over there, second one here to your right. I was absolutely not over by that painting. This is obviously dimmed down, and there's a shield over the top of it. But I couldn't. It was breathtaking to me to see that painting. It just sang that day. Mermaid Roses here at the very back. That was there, obviously painted in California, and a seminal work, as we all know, because that is how Anne Hubert fell in love with James Fitzgerald, and how James Fitzgerald fell in love with Anne, and that started all of this, actually. Coast in Winter, of course, was also California. East River was from New York. Snow, Ice, and Water was from Vermont, and that is here. From Vermont, Home by Moonlight, which is not here, but that's down in the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Trout Stream, Boats of Monhegan. Where are we here? I'm not seeing the reflections.
It's the first one.
Are we?
Boats of Monhegan, right here.
Right here, sorry, yeah, the reflections. Boats of Monhegan. And then there's also Storm Cloud and Burgess Catan. Beautiful paintings. Storm Cloud particularly appealed to me, and still does. It's a thrilling work. Oxen, the two oxen pulling was there. I never knew if it was sunset or sunrise. Pinks on those oxen, and the sensitivity of one to another, the affection for them was just so touching. Among my favorites, too, was a painting of a rhododendron, a flower in Anne's bedroom, which was absolutely lush, and it was my Mermaid Roses. I thought there would be a painting that would do it for me if I were in the studio. Well, okay, I was deeply, deeply struck by what I saw, and I'm sure that I said some appropriate things, but the truth of this is that so much of this was really unexpected. I don't know if I was terribly vocal. I really was a little stunned. But I had to be careful, I had to be careful because I had to speak for myself. I could only go a little way to speak for the museum because that would be another step, the director and a board, etc. So it was an exploratory assignment, I guess, and so all I could do was, of course, show great appreciation, which I did. Fitzgerald paintings made a palpable impact. Here was marked variety on display. Some certainly you can see here. Masterful composition, vibrancy where needed. Great differences in color and tonal range from one to the other. This was not the same song, second verse by any means. But for all of that, something more. And that you seem to hear a lot about James Fitzgerald, something more. I get goosebumps even saying it because I still feel this. I don't think it's extreme to say that I was receiving something more, a thought, a life of consequence perhaps, a searching, and there were echoes of an inner peace that were in so many of the works that read through them. And even those that often had great activity in them, there was some stillness about them. And even that's what I felt when I saw the works. So, paraphrasing the foreword to the exhibition catalog by Marius Pellido, then director of the Farnsworth Library and Art Museum, no one who knew Fitzgerald ever came away without a definite impression of the man, and no one sees his oils and watercolors is likely to mistake them as by somebody else. And those of you who know Fitzgerald certainly know that. He was his own man, writes Pellido, and spoke with his own voice. Well, I returned to the museum, wrote a glowing report recommending the paintings, but most unfortunately, there was no action taken. One of the reasons probably was, but certainly might have been, the finalizing plans for the new building that was going up in Portland for the museum, which had drained off a lot of staff time. The director and some staff were flying back and forth to Manhattan, bringing architects into Portland, and a professional fundraiser had also been hired. And so that was taking up staff time as they went and talked to various donors. About a half a year later than that, I resigned, and I moved to Boston and took a job with a fine arts consulting firm. And then after that, became promotion manager of a book company that collected and distributed art exhibition catalogs to universities and municipal libraries in this country and globally. I stayed there a number of years and was still there when I completed my degree. I believe it was in late winter, we're going back here to when I'm moving to Boston, late winter in Boston, that I wrote a card to Hubert. And I recalled our visit, telling Anne that I would really like to visit them when spring came, that I wanted to enjoy their company again, and I certainly wanted to see that garden. And I still remember this. It seemed like the next day I got a response, and it was something like, "Spring Schming, how about this weekend?" what she did. So that started it, actually. It was a warm, close friendship, many casual meetings, dinners at their home, visits to the Museum of Fine Arts, of course, and much discussion about Fitzgerald all the way along, and of course even a visit or two to Mohegan. Throughout all this, for professional reasons, I avoided discussion of the Portland Museum because of their lack of interest, it would seem, in their nascent offer, and praised the museum for its work on their expansion of physical space, which of course was needed and has been much applauded and helpful. So at last, the Huberts invited me out to a lunch and formally sat me down, formally asked me to write a book on Fitzgerald. They thought about it for a long time. They said, felt it was necessary for his greater exposure, and he could do more than piecemeal work of showings on the island as they could, as you know they did regularly, and gallery exhibitions here and there as were possible. I said no. And as much as I wanted to help them, I'd been working on my doctoral exams and my dissertation for years, and working full-time as well, which I just completed, and I was honestly weary of research. I just didn't know if I wanted to tackle more. But I offered to connect them with some qualified specialists in the field who would be eminently qualified to produce a biography, and I had several in mind, in fact. So about 6 months later, Anne and Ed invited me to their house, sat me down again, this time with greater resolve. Okay, if I didn't read the book, they might not go further, they said. And because they knew of my love for Fitzgerald's work, they would trust the process more with me than someone else. And they were certain it would be in the decision Fitzgerald would approve of. They were good friends by this time, and a biography was clearly needed, and I consented. Luckily, Ed broke out a bottle of champagne, which they did on mark-up occasions. As you know, he was ready with that all the time. The next question was what arrangement or terms would I require of them, which of course meant my cost for all the writing of the manuscript, the carrying through the details right to the very end. Well, I told them I would take no money, but if in the process of the writing they wished to give me a painting by Fitzgerald of their choosing, that would be sufficient. And so it began. The Huberts had a good relationship with Marius Pellido at the Farnsworth, and the museum was happy to serve as the publisher. The entire publication, of course, was heavily subsidized by the Huberts. My work on the biography took 1 year, and since I was employed full-time, it was a matter of nights and weekends and vacations, and a good portion of the time spent in their basement. Remember that Fitzgerald saved very few letters and exhibitions, notices of exhibitions from his early life, and of course did a lot for his later life. Some of you remember that she had collected and assembled all that was useful, and would remember also a rank of files, about eight of them in the basement, all chock-a-block with Fitzgerald notes. By the way, that rank of files was against the wall, on the other side of which Ed Hubert, that was his frame shop. He had taught himself framing, the craft of framing, and they also had in there file cabinets, of course, for drawings and watercolors. It was kind of, I guess, kind of funny to me, but Ed was so serious about it. He would don an apron, and he had actually printed a work order, and he would fill in his work order, almost like a short order cook, and he'd hang it up, and then he would follow through with it. It was absolutely perfect. It was absolutely precise. Especially dear to me were times here on the island and in the Kent House. The inside just exuded tremendous warmth, and the accumulated history that went way back in the early days of Rockwell Kent. His willful rocking chair, which we talked about and moved to the left, was very much Rockwell Kent. His piano, the glass bowl that Mermaid Roses was in California, sat near the window in their living room. Horses from California. There was an ink drawing of Pequod by Kent in the bedroom, which was astounding. And some of you who remember the Sweet Mary Kelsey hutch that the Huberts, that you would recognize that name. Fire in the fireplace, long sunsets over the meadow, with spectacular sunsets beyond. It just added to it. And some of the times I remember most fondly were the conversations with Anne, sitting outside in the dark near, there was an old cherry tree next to the garden, and they'd go on late into the night, and I felt every bit, and I'm really sincere about this, like a Rockwell Kent illustration out of Moby Dick, looking out at that chill night air, and sitting there with the stars so crisp and pure. It had all of the power that Kent would envision. Its darkness was it's just absolutely indelible, and it seemed fit because the house wasn't electrified at that time, so you were really out in the raw nature, in the stars. So those times and memories of the island remain. In creating the manuscript, chronology was the first hurdle. Where was the man and when? It was hard to know. Records we had, works done, notes and phone calls, all needed in as much as we could manage it to pin down where he was so we could find out what kind of a rhythm he had in his life. Information in the files, transferred to note cards for easy management. All of that happened, and it had to do with mannerisms he had and notes about philosophy and whatever that Huberts could remember. The hard part for me about the biography, actually, I felt like there were two pendulums that were swinging here. One of them was his chronology. So that was here, and so we pinpointed, years and said. The other one was the non-chronological stuff. What do you think about religion? What do you think about color? All of these things have to be interspersed, and where do you do that to make a book that's readable and balanced? And that's pretty hard when the whole first part of his life is not exactly available to you. But that was kind of my task, and I remember that as quite clearly something that I needed to accomplish. One thing I could not fit in was this is true, and I remember it. He distrusted computers, and I couldn't get it in the book. This was the late 50s. Vacuum tubes were going out, transistors were coming in, and mainframes were coming in. Great big, buildings. And even then he said, there's something wrong here. It's going to sap individuals of their humanity. It's going to make them less dependent upon themselves. It's going to ruin interrelationships between people, and all of that is there, and it's that one piece that I just couldn't fit it in. It seemed like the book wasn't going to be right if I did that. There wasn't a spot for that to be tossed in, but we now know it. So here it is. There were 2 desks in the basement. Anne gave me one, and so the actual manuscript wasn't written there. I wrote it in libraries. I wrote a good part of it in the Boston Public Library, the law library at Boston College. They didn't seem to mind that I wasn't a law student. I walked in, ambled in, and wrote some biography. And some of the other libraries that were around, regional libraries around Dover. Anne typed the copy that I would write out, she typed it out, and Ruth edited it here as I went along. And I recall photographing some of the works in their basement as well, had it set up in the easel and so forth. A friend and a trained designer, Sarah Bowie, whom I'd known from a museum fellowship, worked with the publisher on the layout of the book. Is I think, beautifully done. It went well. The only thing that was a bit of a glitch was a number of things were sent to a copy center, including quite a batch of Rockwell Kent's original letters, and one of them didn't come back. And there was no way we could trace the contents. And so one always wonders, of course, but that got away from us. Returning to the biography production for now, there was a last-minute problem. We just talked with somebody who knew Sinclair Hitchings. There was an exhibition schedule had already been set up of 3 museums for a traveling show of Fitzgerald's. The library, the Farnsworth Library and Art Museum, that was September of 1984. That was going to be followed by the DeCordova and Dana Museum and Park, I'm be sure to get that right, in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Finally, the Monterey Museum, Peninsula Museum in California. The book was never intended to be an exhibition catalog. It was to accompany this show and be available at the various sites. The holdup was Sinclair Hitchings, the author of the introduction, who was keeper of prints at the Boston Public Library. Sinclair repeatedly missed deadlines, and so the book could not go to press, and this greatly agitated the Ed man, and we're thinking about trying to, at the last minute, find someone else to write an introduction when it came through. And glad that we really were. It's a tremendously off-the-cuff, right hitting the nail on the head about Fitzgerald. It's eminently readable and a fine introduction to the biography, so we're all very pleased about that. Well, so much for my encounter with James Fitzgerald and the Huberts. I believe the book did what they intended, what we wished it would do, to get him into the literature on a scale hard to accomplish without a book, and serve as a further basis for scholarship and for exposure. And since the book was a biography, as much as an art history text, it allowed for a generous handling of the artist's thought, the workings of the inner man, and for the remaining time, I'd like to shift briefly and talk about that, to revisit that. The 2 major influences on Fitzgerald are well known: Asian philosophy from the East and Cézanne from the West. When you think about that, it's not exactly a likely pairing. For Cézanne, it was the incredible compositional necessity, no doubt, that he achieved. Also, the dynamic use of forces and movement that he created, and oftentimes the imbalances that he created in place that weren't round, the arms that were lower than they should be, fruit rolling off a table, skewed angles for tables and tablecloths, incredible work. Often the imbalances, of course, made sense artistically. He seemed to explore, to me, how human vision worked. It was really a look inward as much as outward. And how did human vision translate the world to us? How could it translate the world to us? Paintings were an investigation, in other words, and that's something akin to Fitzgerald, who not saying that this is a direct hangover from Cézanne, but Fitzgerald himself did not want to be called an artist. He wanted to be called an experimenter, and that does make sense. So you're obviously not going to recognize stylistic similarities between Cézanne and Fitzgerald. It will be hard to find that. Now, I have something I want to pass out. This is not exactly going to be caught on video, but I've got one for this side, one for another side. It's a picture that I took of a portrait that's hanging in the Museum of Fine Arts by El Greco. Let's see. Every time Fitzgerald went to Boston, he stood in front of this painting. He would tell Anne and Ed for an hour or more, looking at it, absorbed in it. I'm sorry to say this because some of you haven't seen it, but you keep it in mind. It's a Jesuit theologian whose name is Fray Feliz Hortensio Palacino. He was an orator. He was a Jesuit, and also a friend of El Greco's. And by the way, it entered the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts at the recommendation of John Singer Sargent in the early 1900s. In it, one finds a dynamic flame-like movement of the white rose, which you'll see leading up. Forces set about by the off-center chair that was there. One hand tense, he's holding, as if he's trying to hold a page in a book. The other hand is relaxed. I say relaxed, but I'll tell you that the tension in that man, I would watch out for that hand that's relaxed, because it's going to get you, it would seem to me. Plus, it's just a penetrating look at the psychological nature of the subject. It's a play of forces and forms, of course, that probably captured it. But the truth of the matter is, if you go to Boston and you're in front of that painting, the fun part is you're going to see it here. What was it that drove this man, Fitzgerald, over and over again? What did he find there? Asian philosophy, sensitivity, the thought that influenced Fitzgerald cannot be emphasized too much. And it seemed likely he had an affinity for this very early on. Naturally, this is speculation, but one wonders why shortly after his formal training in Massachusetts Normal Art School, later Massachusetts College of Art, and the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, that Fitzgerald decided to head to Sri Lanka. What was it? Was this just an adventure? He had many of them. He had gone to the Caribbean. Was it something about the landscape that got him? Or was it because the official religion was official state religion was Buddhism that had been introduced to Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BCE, and today is 70% Buddhist and 12% Hindu. So that may have been a draw early on. Certainly, however, it was in Monterey, California, where he ended up, that fostered and heightened his quest to look into Asian thought. Waves of this were coming across the Pacific, and one need to look no further than the presence of Jiddu Krishnamurti to prove it. He was a few years younger than James Fitzgerald, loosely connected to the group that included, we all know, John Steinbeck, Ed Ricketts, Jefferson Robbins, Jeff Robinson Jefferson poet, and so forth. Krishnamurti was trying to explore human interrelationships, but also meditation. He took a holistic view of all of this, and he wanted more than anything to change, for individuals to look into their own psyche to see if it could be changed. So I always wonder how much Fitzgerald's contact with him was, because there's something there, and would probably be in any event. Also, Fitzgerald was building a library that was weighted heavily with Asian philosophy and poetry and efforts to secure Chinese ink, as you all know, blocks that were made in the 18th century. So what was all this for? What was he trying to capture? Getting at the answer to this has to do with non-dual philosophy, a non-dual approach to phenomena. So forgive me for a second to be going into a kind of perhaps a lower level primer, but it might help. In the West, we live among objects, individual objects, each with its own identity. But in Eastern thought, there's a spiritual force or an elan present in everything. Its timeless presence is of a higher reality than the physical component, yet both are inherent in the object. So you have both. In the West, 1 and 1 make 2. In the East, 1 and 1 make 2, but also 1. That 1 is a single spirit that is through everything. And so you link with that. So we're all one, and yet what makes the second part of that, what makes the hard part, it's the physicality of stone, of wood, and also the intrusion of our own wills, our own egos, and things that we have that block us from that. And so the idea, which is a noble pursuit, is to try to get to that core. And so this is what I'm thinking that certainly is inherent in his library and many of his works as well. So, how does this mental spiritual stuff work? How does it work in the framework of art? Well, by ridding the subjects of what is non-essential, there's a possibility of revealing the spirit. At best, it's something that can be felt, a sensed presence. It might be light or it might be overpowering. And I just have to point out something here, something of this nature. You can see what has been subtracted here. The presence of this, certainly, and we'll talk perhaps a bit about also snow, life, ice, and water, which becomes so seminal. Perhaps it comes down to nothing more than a different type of awareness of approaching objects, but I think it's more. And likely, the meditative approach of Chinese or Japanese calligraphers, where you sit and meditate for hours before you begin your task, it cannot be done, this capturing, unless the maker, the artist, senses and feels it. And Fitzgerald actively pursued a commitment to strengthen his spiritual, physical, and mental faculties. That's very well known. And his art can't really be fully appreciated without understanding that. And also, what the life of the mind meant to him. His library was gleaned over and over again. It contained works by the giants of Western philosophy as well, Western thinking. The very fact that he has repeated delvings into this, these resources, over and over again, has a monastic feel to it. It just does. I mean, it was a prized treasure, and he went over it and took notes and wrote interlinear in it, and with a real devotion. Certainly it was a quest, but you have to think about this. There's a lot of time spent on this, and it's something of the essence of the man. To give a feeling of the essence, the non-essentials had to be pared away, as we talked about. The seminal moment was Snow, Ice, and Water, which is here, which I don't even need notes for this. He's in Vermont. He sees this at late night, late dusk. He's heading back to his lodgings, and something is indelible. He sees something that registers. He's ready for that. He's prepared for this. He sees this, and he goes back to his lodgings, and he wakes up the next morning, and he paints it from memory. And what's not there are things that are not essential. What's there is what's essential. And so, not only is that the truth of it seems, but also that there's a balance of forces here. This is water that is transitioning to ice or the other way around. It is the same, obviously, element, but it's in a state of transition. And the rest of this, of course, a beautiful painting, but the rest of this, of course, again, is cut down to the bare minimum. And to me, one of the most thrilling things, actually, philosophically, is the source of this. The source of this is hidden from you. You can't see that it's coming from the ridge up on the hill, but you see it in the water because it's here. So it's almost as if whatever is giving you that divine spirit or this creation is reflected here, and it's not something you're going to be seeing. Whitman does this too when he talks about this ferry ride across the East River, and in some of his poetry, the reflection and how temporary it is and how important. Let's see. This was noted, by the way, this change, because he was not going to be painting on site much longer. He was going to be painting in his studio, but he was going to be cooking a lot. So his style changed, and it was noted in California. In this particular review in the Del Monte Gallery in Monterey, I believe, it says that talks about what's happened and the change. And the quote here is, "If you are already familiar with the work of the watercolorist James Fitzgerald of Montgomery, this show will have a special interest for you. The surprise for the Fitzgerald worshiper," kind of like that because it was happening back then, lies in the shocking realization that almost every picture is a new version of an old composition. Fitz seems to have dug deep into the racks and files of his work, which date back long, long ago, in fact, into the New England period. The well-known California ranch horses are here again, this time presented by the new Fitzgerald, capitalized, with all his newfound wisdom and deep understanding. Okay? But whatever has happened to Fitzgerald, it ain't love. Fitzgerald, the zealot, in his search for fundamental truths, has tossed out so much that is rich and warm and human, that what remains to carry on into his work puts it definitely on the verge of sterility, unquote. Well, okay. Prior exhibition at the gallery by the reviewer says this, that he's praised, in fact, for giving over to the moods of the waters, the ocean, its shallow waters, its quiet bays, and harbors. It says, young, quoting here, young, a thinker with talent, and with great love for his chosen subject, Fitzgerald should travel far, unquote. Jim's incredible draftsmanship in the early days subsides as elements are stripped to essentials, but design, composition, and astute observation remain. His early training put it there, and it's obviously well-founded. He was breaking new ground here. And I'm delighted to hear the comment that affirms his search for fundamental truths, which is very much in keeping with what we know about the man. Quotes abound, referencing Fitzgerald's non-dual quest, this work of tapping and presenting a sense of the spiritual through humans and through nature. One must think at the back of the mountain as you paint it. And in listening to the wind rustling the wings of ravens, he was asked by a young girl what he was looking at, and the quote was, "the essence of it." He responded. Peter Burma, whose child it was, observed that his comment seemed to encapsulate Fitzgerald's entire life, namely a search for essentials and a concern for nothing less. Another one, standing on the rocks, one can sense their support descending way into the deep, Jim said. It gives the look of water a special gravity too. So here we are. But to follow this path fully required solitude, and Jim in island life became more of a loner. Perhaps the tendency was there before. He was given solitude as a child in a large family so that he could work. He found great solace in the woods and the streams and back of his grandparents' home in Milton, Massachusetts. When he graduated from his formal training, he decided that he did not want to teach. Rather, he wanted to be a gilder because that way he could be by himself and he could support his work as an artist. So summing up what he refers to as Fitzgerald's stubborn and obsessive quest, Sinclair Hitchings likens his life to a pilgrimage. The direction, of course, was Fitzgerald's own, and he had his own compass. The richness of an inner life was not going to yield to success commercially in galleries and exhibitions, and so he backed away from them. Sinclair once again opines that the spirit of Fitzgerald might be saying in his ear, "You're not going to pin a label on me, just say I was my own man." Is this going to be okay? I was going to be my own man, he says. Which he was, of course. With some final thoughts before closing. When I was involved with this work, there used to be, and there was, not exactly a tension, but there was a recognized difference between what was a regional artist and what might be considered one who was had a national reputation. Edward Broll, the director of the Plattsburgh State Art Museum, and who had worked for years in commercial galleries in Manhattan, hinted at this in the documentary that was done on Fitzgerald, when he said, "He's now in the literature," and see him standing there. He said, "and will he escape to further recognition? Time will tell." Okay. It occurred to me as a question years ago whether Fitzgerald's individuality in his life and his work held him back from that acclaim, as well as his having withdrawn from public viewings. In the end, it wouldn't have mattered. It would never have mattered to him. The inner life for this man seemed to be paramount, and it came to be more so. And the works that emanated it reflected their own subject and visual language. In the years since the book, something has come about which helps soften the edges between this regional and national difference. And that's the way of looking seriously at the local talent and elevating their intrinsic worth in the field. I want to say this again, a fine example of this is right here on the island in Robert Stahl's catalog resume. Jim certainly did have some influence on other artists. Leo Brooks and Michael Vermette are two of them that are currently represented by the Lupin Gallery. Fitzgerald did not want to be called a regional artist. He did not want to be called a main artist either. But it's kind of tough to escape, actually, when you are still a representational artist, not totally abstract, and you're somehow linked to local subject matter. But perhaps Jim's thinking was intended to be more universal, but that's something that is a debate. After all, his quest for essentials was that and nothing less. And so to my last point, one has the sense that in especially paying tribute to this artist's work, you cannot forget the man. His life certainly had some unique qualities. His philosophy distinguishes him, although Asian thinking and meditative practices have grown greatly in the half-century since Fitzgerald's death and have affected many artists, I'm sure. It would still seem rare in the West for an artist to wake up hours before dawn and read and contemplate in preparation for readying his spirit to be able to meld with the spiritual forces outside. Who, like him, stands for hours, looking out into nature, arms crossed, meditating and picking up the spirit coming through water, rocks, light, trees, and beyond? Am I saying this just because he was a Western artist with an Eastern soul? Perhaps. Is there a similar Western philosophy? Might we look at Cézanne? It's kind of hard to say. Cézanne certainly had a spiritual quality about it. But I would think that the difference here is that Cézanne is more akin to Platonic beauty than it is to an Asian sensitivity. In sum, the totality of Fitzgerald's life and sensing it in his work, that's in front of us. And that's worth taking note of. Spirituality does not, in itself, make one a better artist. And I surely do not mean to say that he is a better artist than others, either on Mohegan or elsewhere. It is simply that in his work, more than most artists, these qualities of man's inner life are reflected. His uniqueness is intriguing, much of it coming from and being embroidered with his life on this island. And I feel especially blessed to have been a small part of that. Thank you.